What do you think local consent means? Because our MPs tried to get an answer yesterday and didn't really get one. The government has defended the controversial decision to lift the ban on fracking as long as there is local consent. They say it's more environmentally friendly to use our own sources of fuel than to extract them from other countries. The Business and Energy Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, was brought before the House of Commons yesterday to answer urgent questions about the plan. And it's safe to say the news has not gone down well with his fellow Conservative MPs here in Lancashire. The Fylde MP, Mark Menzies, challenged the view that those opposing fracking are Luddites.
There's nothing Luddite about the people of Lancashire or of Fylde. And I just want to start by saying, Mr Speaker, how disappointed I am that Parliament was not informed about this before the media, that as a local Member of Parliament I was not given the courtesy, despite having requested for 2 weeks, contacting the honourable member to get information via his PPS. I've sent letters, I've sent WhatsApps, nothing back. So, Mr Speaker, can we be crystal clear on one thing? The Prime Minister of Manchester Hustings, it's a matter for public record, you can find the clip, made it crystal clear, no ifs, no buts, no caveats, that fracking would only take place in the United Kingdom where there was local consent. Crystal clear. So if the Prime Minister is to remain a woman of her word, a woman that we can believe in, which I believe she is, can the Secretary of State outline how that local consent will be given and demonstrated in my constituency of Fylde?
Well, the Conservative MP as well, Scott Benton, the MP for the neighbouring seat of Blackpool South, also voiced the concerns of local people regarding fracking here in Lancashire.
Mr Speaker, the Secretary of State will be aware of the strong objections which many of my constituents have to fracking. The Prime Minister has been quite clear in saying it will only take place if there is strong local support for it. However, this poses many questions. What is a local community and how do you define that? How do you ascertain whether or not it can command local support? And what incentives, if any, are going to be provided to local communities to have fracking imposed upon them? My constituents are understandably anxious about fracking returning to the Fylde coast. And so when will they receive an answer to some of these questions?
Well, the Business Secretary didn't offer any indication of how local consent will be measured or how much cash local people may be offered to basically get their support. But he did say that local people would have to agree to fracking in their area and may be offered financial incentives to get that support. Well, I've been speaking to Mark Menzies, the MP for Fylde. I asked him what he thought local consent might look like.
Well, that is one of the questions that was asked repeatedly today. Not just what is local consent, but how do you define local? Is local a physical distance from a fracking well? Is it a parish council? Is it a council area? What is local? And then once you decide what local is, how do you measure it? And so some of the basic fundamentals on this, people, parliamentary colleagues and myself repeatedly asked questions and the answer came back none. And so we are not going to let up on this. We're going to keep on demanding answers from the government until the government is in a position that it can lay out in a way that is not open to interpretation, what its policy is on this matter. And at the moment, it's far from that.
You heard Jacob Rees-Mogg say possibly it would mean people in that area, and as you say, we are yet to define how big of an area that will be. They will benefit from it, i.e. maybe get money off their gas bill. Would you support it if that was on offer?
But yet again, it was vague. It was maybe money off a gas bill. We need to start to be, at this stage in the game, I would have expected government to come forward and able to put before Parliament the very basics on this policy. Before you give the green light to something, know where it's going. And if they're unable to define a local area, if they're unable to decide what a community benefit package or a compensation package is, as Jacob Rees-Mogg often referred to, if they're unable to even say what that is, that tells me they've got a lot of work to do.
Now, you're a Tory MP for Fylde. You stood on that manifesto in 2019 saying they wouldn't carry on fracking unless it's proven to be safe. Now, many people would say that your government is now changing the goalposts.
Well, it's not just people that were saying the government is changing the goalposts. I'm saying the government is changing the goalposts. if you listen to what myself and my parliamentary colleagues Scott Benton and Paul Maynard said, we're all speaking with one voice on this, and that is the government has to, above all else, follow through on the Prime Minister's commitment that fracking can only take place with local consent. Now, perhaps, Graham, I've misread this. Perhaps there is huge local consent for that. If that is the case, the government has got nothing to fear. But you cannot go into an election process, as the Prime Minister did, and make crystal clear commitments in public to media organisations in front of large jury audiences, and then a few weeks later not follow through on that. She is a woman of integrity. She is a woman I believe will keep her word, and parliamentary colleagues will remind the government of that fact.
Even the British Geological Society report said that they can't guarantee we're not going to have earth tremors in the future if fracking should start. In the past, Quadrilla have likened the tremors to a large bag of shopping being dropped on the floor, and they say in big construction sites, the seismic activity is much bigger than you got at Preston New Road. Are earth tremors, little ones, a price to pay to get this gas?
Well, let's be clear. The traffic light system which the government brought in meant a red event was 0.5. And, that was something that the fracking industry agreed to. They signed up to all these rules and regulations. They assured me that they could do it within it. And this was before they actually started. Preston New Road wasn't 0.5, it was 2.9. Now, 2.9 is 251 times more powerful. The bag of shopping that they talk about is a 1.6. And what the industry want to do is not move it to 2.9, they want to move it to 4. Now, 4 is 3,180 times more powerful than a 0.5. 177,000 times, that's right, 177,000 times the amount of energy released than a 0.5. These are House of Commons library statistics. And so, I'm afraid the government, when they said that this had to also be determined by the science, well, the science is in front of you. The BGS have made their concerns, pretty clear in the report that was published today. So it's very important that government acts on that.
So when Jacob Rees-Mogg says people are being hysterical about this, and he's also likened some of the opposition to fracking as been funded by Vladimir Putin's regime, how does that make you feel?
Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg is in a fantastic position here, because Jacob Rees-Mogg has shale gas under his own constituency in North East Somerset. So I think it's really important. In life, you lead by example. And so if the Secretary of State is so sure that this is a process that would garner huge local support, if he's convinced that this would have no impact on the countryside, if he's quite happy for bags of shopping or lorries or whatever other euphemism you want to use for an earthquake, if he's quite happy with that to take place and affecting himself, then lead by example. He has it in his own gift. He could quite easily tomorrow grant a fast-track process in North East Somerset and test the waters. So, I think all of our listeners, in fact, I think the nation would take a bow if the Secretary of State was to take leadership in his own constituency. So, he has it in his own gift. So let's wait and see.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, over to you. Mark Menzies there, laying it on the line. Let's speak to one of the local residents, Barbara Richardson. Barbara lives close to Rossiter Wood, one of the sites earmarked for fracking in the past. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, Graham.
Here we are again.
I know. It's like Groundhog Day, isn't it?
How do you feel?
I feel absolutely appalled by what was said by Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday in the House. I think Mark Menzies has summed it up perfectly. This is a completely ill-thought-out plan, if you will. So I'm angry as well. So basically I'm appalled, I'm angry, and I'm extremely anxious that they're just going to override everything that we know and just force it upon us. That's what I'm more worried about, that the people in power, Jacob Rees-Mogg, that they'll try to change things like the planning permissions, make these nationally strategic important projects, so it won't even go through a planning process anymore. I'm concerned that they might try to force it upon us no matter what we say and no matter how little community support there is for this.
So when he says that, he said this in the House of Parliament yesterday, Quake fears as hysteria and claims people don't understand the science and you're a Luddite. What would you say to him?
I would say the opposite. I would say he's the Luddite. I mean, why are you trying to put out a fossil fuel crisis by creating more fossil fuels? You know, fossil fuels are old, the wrong way to go. He's the Luddite. He's the one who's not looking at the alternatives. Talking about hysteria, he obviously, to me, it was patently obvious from listening to Jacob Rees-Mogg, he does not understand what fracking is, what it entails and what the potential dangers are, and he seriously underestimates the amount of public opposition.
Do you think that the public opposition might wane a little if they're offered some money? Show us the money, and actually, I may not be that dead against it.
Yeah. I think there's always people. We're in an energy crisis. We know that people are hard up, and nobody would argue that. There's people who need money and need help with their energy bills, but this is not the way to go about it. I mean, what they're trying to do is effectively bribe communities into accepting fracking. I don't think it would wash. I think the public have got more common sense that they can see through this, and they can see what we're doing. Do you know of any other industry where they have to actually offer incentives for you to come and work or to develop in your area? I don't know of any other industry that would do it. And I'm really cynical and sceptical about what community support means, because it seemed to me that Rees-Mogg was saying it is down to the industry to determine or to convince the community that it would work in their area. I can't see anybody on the field believing what Quadrilla would say, what they would try to offer.
Barbara, we've got to leave it there. Great to talk to you again. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon. Barbara Richardson there. Coming up after 8, we're going to speak to someone who is pro-fracking and thinks that we should at least give it a go, at least see what we're sitting on. Yesterday, the British Geological Society released its long-awaited report into fracking. It broadly says that forecasting large earthquakes remains a scientific challenge and more research is needed. Let's get the thoughts now of Professor Richard Davis. He is a geologist and an expert on fracking from Newcastle University. Good morning.
Morning.
So are you surprised by the lifting of the moratorium of the ban on fracking?
Yes, I am surprised, but it's been because about 6 months ago, I said on the television this was very unlikely to come back, but we didn't know that Putin was going to invade Ukraine at that time. So the whole turn of events that the energy crisis has triggered is a surprise to all of us, I think.
Okay, and what can you tell us about the British Geological Society report? What did they say about fracking and the forecasting of tremors?
Okay, so this is a detailed report that's been written and submitted to government, and there's a whole bunch of things in here. I mean, in a nutshell, we've not really moved a tremendous amount since 2019 when the moratoria came into place. It's not as if over the last 2 or 3 years we've gone in, we've managed to get the technology or understanding that people would need. So our ability for the scientific community or for the business community, we can't see the faults that are causing the earthquakes before the well is drilled, so they're not imageable, and we know that from Lancashire. We can just about predict the upper size of these earthquakes. We know they shouldn't really exceed around 3 in magnitude. And another thing that's come out from the BGS report is, should the traffic light system that I think people are now aware of, should that be revised? Because the red traffic light basically says that if you have a magnitude 0.5 or above, you have to stop. And I think there is a suggestion in this report that those traffic light guidelines and rules are modified, probably to increase the red traffic light of 0.5 may go up. So this report basically says we can't yet see the faults, we can't predict the absolute size of the earthquakes, and the traffic light system may need to be revised.
So the big question is, because we've done it here in Lancashire, can fracking be done safely?
Look, there's no such thing as safe. I drove to work this morning. That wasn't necessarily safe. There were speed limits which were keeping me within a certain which were guidelines to make sure that the journey was as safe as possible. It's the same for fracking. There is no such thing as safe. I think the next question is quite a simple one. If you started again, where in the UK would you go? Are there parts of the UK where there is enough evidence to suggest that the chances of earthquakes are lower, or faults can be avoided? And the second question is, if there is such a place, how much confidence do planning authorities need, or does the government need to go ahead in that place, that part of the United Kingdom? And thirdly, has the gas crisis or the energy crisis changed public opinion? Because a year ago, the government's public attitude tracker said that 45% of those interviewed opposed fracking and only 17 supported it. Has that changed? So those are the three big questions. Is there a better part of the UK? Can we have enough confidence that we're not going to cause felt seismicity? And thirdly, is public opinion changed? And there are parts of the East Midlands that may be better than Lancashire.
Right. So but what, because of the geology of Lancashire to the East Midlands?
Yes. I mean, we don't know this. It's just a hunch, really, that the geology may be somewhat simpler. The faults may be easier to see on seismic data, which is the data that's acquired. It's a bit like a sort of an echo scan you might get in, and it allows you to see underneath the earth. The faults may be easier to spot, and it may be that the shale is better. Now, we don't know that. It's a hunch, really, a geological hunch. It may be worth looking at it.
Well, what do you make of what Chris Cornelius has said this week? The guy who set up Quadrilla, who is for fracking. He looks at what they do in the States and fracking works. He just looks at the geological kind of landscape of this country and says it's never going to work, really, at a large scale.
Well, I think we've been saying that for several of us have said that for some time. So it just happens that he said it now. The UK is a small country. We don't have the tracts of land that the Texans have, for example, for fracking. In America, they often landowner may own the mineral rights, so it's in their interest to allow fracking on their land. In the United States, there are 1,500 drilling rigs that could be mobilized pretty quickly to allow fracking to take place quickly. They have a supply chain. We have none of those. So it's not just the geology, which is complex, and there's a suspicion that the geology doesn't work in many parts of the United Kingdom. It's also the fact that people don't own the mineral rights. It's the fact we don't have a supply chain. There are many reasons why fracking is likely to be a small contributor, if a contributor at all. And can I make one other point, which is really important? The fracking, a borehole that's been fracked produces a small amount of gas. Now, we use 2.8 trillion cubic feet of gas every year in this country. We would need hundreds of boreholes to make any dent on our reliance on imports. And the fact is, a dozen have been drilled in as many years. I mean, we just have not been able to drill enough wells quickly enough in the past for this to be viable. And I really struggle to see that changing unless there is a very significant change in planning regulations and how that goes forwards.
Richard, thank you. That is Professor Richard Davis, a geologist and expert on fracking from Newcastle University. Well, with the current energy crisis and skyrocketing prices, some people say fracking is too great of a resource to actually overlook. Tim Freshney is the managing director of a Blackpool engineering firm, which already works in the offshore oil and gas industry. Also a member of the North West Chamber of Commerce. Tim, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Morning.
Well, what do you make of what Professor Richard Davis has just said?
Well, very interesting and obviously factual, and that's what we should be listening to, people who've got the right knowledge and information at hand. So I think if you want to open a debate based on the right information and knowledge, then that's the kind of people that we should be speaking to and taking our knowledge from. Well,
he's kind of said that it's not worth all the hassle.
I don't agree with that. I think we've proved that there are enough reserves. I think we just need to prove that it can be done safely. We need to form our own opinions based on facts and do some polls with local areas again after the few years that we've had moratorium, and just see what appetite there is out there locally.
But he's just said that we need hundreds. We will need hundreds of boreholes all across the UK. We're not the United States. We don't have that much room.
I think when you think in the grander scheme of things, hundreds of wells in the UK is absolutely a speck on the landscape. So I think we shouldn't get carried away with that statement made there. When there's a pad in a field locally, they can drill numerous wells locally without anybody sort of noticing any difference. So I think we should not ignore it, but take that on board. But hundreds of wells is not a large number at all.
So earth tremors, is that the price to pay for cheaper energy?
I mean, I'm a local resident to the Preston New Road site. So, I can speak from experience. And yes, we all experienced a tremor back in 2019. So it's about sort of taking on board possible mistakes that have been made before, or looking at new ways of doing things, but always look at the facts. So, I think we should move forwards, but move forwards with caution.
Well, you talk about looking at the facts.
Yeah.
Do you talk about the traffic light system?
Okay.
And Jacob Rees-Mogg equates hysteria around earthquakes caused by fracking. The earthquake of 2.9 on the Richter scale, did you feel that one on Preston New Road?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you felt that in 2019. It led to the ban on fracking. That was 251 times bigger than the safety limit. 251 times bigger.
I mean, to pass comment on that, I'm not going to profess to be an expert. I think maybe the chap who was on earlier, the professor, might have been able to answer that question for you. But as I said, I think we should proceed with caution, but also look at new sites that have much more wide space around before we reach urban areas.
But you talk about proceeding with caution. You talk about proceeding with caution. The original traffic light system, quadrillas signed up to, and they couldn't stick to it. And you say we're being cautious, but now they're saying, actually, 0.5, come on. We're all being a bit soft. Let's push it a bit higher and a bit higher. And you can understand why people around Preston New Road are really, really worried.
Yeah, I can get that. I just think that, we need to sort of start again and just sort of have a look at where we are. I mean, are we really going to have a discussion about our own country not to be able to sort of self-sufficient on energy? I mean, look, who could predict the war in Ukraine? So, we have to move forwards and look at sustaining ourselves one way or another. It's certainly not going to be fracking. We know it's not going to be fracking. It's going to support us wholly. It's going to be a small part to play. So if it's not Preston New Road, it's going to be somewhere else. So I think we just need to look at it, bring it in with the energy mix. Let's look at renewables as well. We should all look and open our minds up to all forms of energy. Fracking should just be just one of those. And if it can't be done safely close to sort of urban areas, then we'll do it somewhere else. But I think it will be a part of the future in some way, shape or form, whether we like it or not.
The big term local consent, and a lot of people don't know what that means.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? And do you think local consent may change if there is a financial incentive for people in the local area?
I know that they looked at that last time round with Quadrilla obviously looking at giving back to the community. So, yeah, I mean, again, you know, information is key to this. So bringing the community together, having some discussions with Francis from Quadrilla, no doubt, and his team. And let's put people's negative thoughts, hopefully put some to rest. Let's get moving again and just see where it takes us. And if it's not going to work locally, then they have to set up somewhere else and apply for new licences. If the government's now decided they're going to grant licences, then let's move forward and do it somewhere else. It may not work out in Blackpool for whatever reason if it's not viable in our area, but I'm sure there are other areas where there's licences granted that aren't as high profile in the news that's going ahead right now.
Tim, thank you. Thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. Tim Freshney, who is a managing director of a Blackpool engineering firm, already works in the offshore oil and gas industry and a member of the North West Chamber of Commerce. We are well late for travel, but we had a lot.